Welcome to How to Go to Work, the podcast that explores the honest advice you need to know at the start of your career. And today we'll be being joined by Natalie Woods and leading this podcast live from the University of Liverpool. And we've got a wonderful audience in front of us today, and we'll be getting their questions and thoughts as we go. But I'll start off with my first question to Natalie, which is, looking back, what advice do you wish you'd had at the start to help you navigate your journey into work?
Okay, I think looking back, I wish that I had considered my own opinions a little bit more, which maybe sounds a little counterintuitive from the introduction that I gave a minute ago. So I'll give a little bit of background to why I think that. But I think it's really easy when you're in a situation where you feel a little bit out of your depth or you're not really sure where you're going to just assume that you have a baseline of zero knowledge and that you have to take the advice of literally everyone around you, and that if you've asked someone a question, it's your responsibility to really take that as gospel and use it. But having gone through sort of that phase as an undergrad and realising now that actually when you look at yourself as a whole and you go to your tutors, if you've got like a tutor in your course, or you go to the career services and you ask for advice, you're asking for advice, not asking for a command. So for me, I think if I could go back to the person that I was when I was first starting as an undergrad, I wish that I had just asked the question and gone away with that advice rather than immediately going, okay, I have to do that. I wish that I'd given myself more weight in the sense of like, I knew then that I wanted to go into research, but for some reason, if somebody had said to me at the time, oh, well, you should consider careers outside of science, I'd have taken it and been like, well, that's my pathway then.
And what really made the difference? Was there one thing that made you realise that you needed to take a certain path as opposed to another one? As you say, not a command, but maybe a piece of advice that got you thinking in a different direction.
I think for me, actually, it would have been that. So I was on Realising Opportunities, as I mentioned at the start. And when I was a part of that scheme, it's a really big cohort. So it's like 250 people that are all from sort of different, but the same kind of background. So we're all outreach. We're all sort of that like diversifying education. But everybody from it has like such different perspectives, and that was really for me the first time I had been outside of my own bubble. So when you talk about like experiences that sort of are formative and they change the way that you think about that, I realised then that actually there's loads of people that have a really similar perspective and a really similar drive to me. My motivation wasn't that I wanted to make £1 million and like go and get a job that I was going to be working a 9-5 and in the middle of a city centre. I never wanted that. But when I was looking at like courses that were advised and I went to sort of careers fairs, a lot of the time the discussion was in that sort of vein. People would be like, oh, well, this is the income that you can make from this career, or this is how many people do like trips abroad to go to these meetings. And I was like, but I just want to do what I enjoy. I don't really want any part in this like rat race-esque career. So when I was on RO, it was my first time speaking to people that were academics, that were teaching, that people that were working in outreach, where their motivation came more so from what they were passionate about. And I had only ever known it to be like, you either have a job or you have a career, and if you have a job, it just pays bills. That's all you wanted to do. And meeting people that were passionate about their career and passionate about what they did really was that flipping perspective for me. But I was like, I'm allowed to want this because it brings me joy more broadly than just pays.
I love that. I love that idea that you should pursue something that brings you joy. But that can feel quite risky as well, especially when you come from a background which is predominantly about getting a job and earning the money. So what helped you understand what you were passionate about, what you really wanted to do, and how did you make those choices about what to do next on the basis of joy, which sounds like a wonderful way of thinking about it?
I've kind of split into two. Now I would split into two. When I was sort of very early into being an undergrad, sort of in that freshest period, I liked biology because it was kind of quite broad. I almost felt a little bit suffocated as an undergrad because it was like there's so much choice and there's so much to do and I really don't know what direction I want to go in. So I chose a course that I felt I could sort of do as much as possible and get a taste of everything. And that was really like what brought me comfort almost. It was this sense that I haven't tied myself in really early and I want that flexibility there. But weirdly enough, as I sort of went through my degree, I ended up, you get a part-time job, you work a little bit on the side to boost that maintenance. And I ended up working for the university in their Liverpool Advocate scheme. But I only ever worked in outreach. So I did lots of tutoring and mentoring. And I always thought that I would hate teaching. I always thought that I would despise working with kids because they're not really my vibe. But I ended up really enjoying it. And I really enjoyed this idea that I had the hindsight to give them advice that I wish people had given me. And it was so close. I mean, I was still going through that experience. I was only 2 or 3 years in front of these students. But I could give them really relevant, really up-to-date advice. And if I wasn't sure, I had the network to help them. I knew the people that would know the answer to their questions. And so I sort of ended up split in two, so to speak. So in my academic career, I was motivated by this idea that I was interested in human disease and I wanted to go down that path. And as we came out of COVID, I got some experience working in a lab. And I realised that actually I really enjoy research, and that's not an area where you get tons of women, really. So that was quite a strange environment. You know, you go to these interviews, these different companies, and it's like a panel of 5 men in suits asking you questions, and you're like, I understood some of the words in that sentence, but not all of them. And then on the flip side, I was the polar opposite, and I'm working with people who were from this estate, and they went to a school and they had 30% attendance and didn't really want to go to uni, but they're doing it because they won the maintenance loan. So seeing both sides of that coin was really the thing that motivated me, because I was like, I get to do the bit that I love academically and the bit that I think almost feels like giving back, but not so much. It's more so being involved in the community that means so much to me.
That's a wonderful balance. One of the bits of advice I always give is to self-reflect quite a lot. And that sounds easy enough, but actually is tremendously difficult. The exercise that I did for the previous workshop was to look at your values and your strengths, kind of what people say about you that's good, your interests, and the kind of outcomes that you want as well. So it's interesting to hear you say, I actually realised quite early on I didn't want to make lots of money. That's not the thing that I wanted as an outcome. And that somewhere in, there's something you discovered about yourself of saying, well, actually, I am more interested than I realised about actually working with people younger than me to help bring them through this difficult period. So how did you go about that process of learning about yourself? When do you stop and self-reflect about your journey and your choices?
I think for me, there have been sort of milestones that I've reached where I've sort of stopped and looked back and thought I would never have done that 6 months ago even. Because the development that you have when you're at uni, at least in my experience, is so rapid. You sort of grow up so quickly because you suddenly go from your home environment and everything's kind of done for you, or you're timetabled by your teachers and you don't really have any choice, to literally everything is done for you, by you, and if you don't do it, it isn't getting done. So for me, a particularly big one, and the example that I would probably give would be when I was applying for placements. So between my second and my third year, we'd come out of COVID and sort of placements had come back, and I obviously was interested in the lab. And I wanted to go for a sort of lab-based summer placement. That was my goal, and I'd written it out, and that was really where I wanted to be. But I was terrified of that experience. Honestly, it felt impossible. And you sort of go on these websites and they list their expectations, and the ideal candidate will have this, and this, and there'll be a round of exams that you have to do by this deadline, and here's this online virtual interview where you speak to no one and the question pops up on the screen and you have to record it, and then your camera crashes and you've got to do it again, and it's a nightmare. But I sort of must have done 15 or 16 iterations of a personal statement and a cover letter and a CV, and I was in and out of the career studio, murdering the life out of everyone, because I was so paranoid that this application would not hold up on its own. And in the end, I ended up applying to these 3 goal placements, and I was like, if I get any of these, I'll be elated, really happy. And I got all 3 offers. So I was that was a massive moment for me where I was no, I was totally capable of that. I was just making it into something that felt a million miles away from where I was at the time. And it's really, I don't know if this is true for everyone, but it's definitely true for me, is that unless I get beyond the point, so it sort of already happened and I've got there and I've got past that and the goal is achieved, I will not accept that it's been a success. So that reflection comes from the experience being over almost.
And it's interesting you mentioned that point about your CV as well. One of the common things I hear is this experience of, all I've done is gone to school and then gone to university. What on earth do I put on my CV? So what did you actually write on that?
I felt exactly like that. I had this, so when I was in sixth form, they made us do like this CV. And what do you write when you don't know what you're going to apply for? It's so difficult. And you're like, I haven't done anything. I'm like 18. What am I supposed to put in this? And I sort of was told, go and find something that you're interested in first, so that you are applying to something, because you can't write a CV that applies to everything ever. It's not going to happen. So I sort of narrowed down my options, and I was like, okay, I want a lab placement, 3 months, and I want to do it in this specific area, which happened to be in cancer research. And I went to the career studio, and I was like, this is what I've got. What do you think I should put in? And they sort of gave me like broad advice. It was like, have you got any like relevant skills from modules that you've sat? Which I didn't think was allowed, which is strange, right? Because nobody's going to police you over what you put in your CV. But for some reason in my head, if I had written that I was studying for this degree, I wasn't allowed to discuss the skills in another section. It felt a bit like I was writing it twice. But that's not true. And that was something that I had to learn from careers. They were like, no, absolutely discuss the skills that you've got. But then like, I also had done this outreach work with the university. So I'm doing outreach work, and there's so much that I've learned from that. And it was really fundamental to me being involved in the schemes that I'm involved in now. That was something that had to go on that CV, even though it wasn't relevant necessarily to being in the lab. It was relevant to who I am as a person and what motivates me, and my desire to go sort of above and beyond my just doing the degree and nothing else. So when you think about putting together a CV, especially if you're not sure that you've got loads of relevant experience, because I didn't, even if you've worked, like I worked in Debenhams for a little while, it's being able to organise yourself. It's showing that, okay, not necessarily what I want to do in the future, but the skills that I had then have informed what I can do now, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And one of the problems I always find as well is that you only often hear the good story too. So you look on, I don't know, LinkedIn, and it's full of everybody's successes, and then you see all the other people around you and all your peers do incredibly well. But the reality is a lot of this is quite tough too. So was there a time when you felt, this is too hard, I'm pushing myself too hard, I'm not going to achieve this? And what did you do to kind of keep going through that challenge?
Yeah, so my journey to university was a little bit unique in the sense that I did like 1 year elsewhere and then transferred. But that transfer process for me was really, really hard, like, because I felt that I had worked so hard to get into university. I had gone through this like massive learning curve of not even knowing what the word UCAS meant. Someone from Liverpool once asked me when I was in year 12, oh, have you started a UCAS application? And I was like, what? Had no idea. So my base level of knowledge had been literally zero. I had done all this work. I had gone and got work experience. I had put so much into it. And then I went to this university and I realised that I had chosen wrong, essentially, which is a horrible realisation to come to, because people's put so much weight on it. You know, you're supposed to go and you're supposed to love that experience and like learn so much from it and get involved in the course, and to have that like realisation, actually, this is not for me and I'm not going to be able to stick this out, was genuinely horrible. But I was really, really lucky in the sense that I had that RO connection and that network, and that meant that there was at least something there that motivated me. I was like, I haven't put all of this energy into this to give up one semester in. So I reached out to the people that I knew at Liverpool and I said, I've made the wrong choice. I know I've made the wrong choice, but have I got options? Is there something I can do? Because I didn't know that transferring was a thing. And they said, yeah, you can basically write yourself a new personal statement, send it to whichever university you want to move to, and fingers crossed, essentially. And it was at that point when I knew that there was an out and that I didn't just have to give up and sort of say, well, all that work was for nothing, it doesn't really matter. That I was like, no, this is going to work for me and I'm going to make it work for me.
Right.
So I wrote this new personal statement and I had phone interviews and like email chains in the 50s with admissions, and like had to demand A-level scripts from exam boards that I didn't even know I'd sat because I didn't do them. It was COVID. I didn't have these things that they were asking of me. And it felt like hundreds of tiny little hurdles, because they would ask me for something and I would like, I don't know what that is. And then I would have to go back to Liverpool and be like, they're asking me for this and I don't understand what they want from me. And eventually it got to a point where I got this like little yellow labelled email and it was like, oh, this is your start date for Liverpool.
Right.
And I was like, thank God.
Yeah.
Like, that's all over. And And then when I started here, I was like, I am going to make the most of this. This is going to work for me because I'm not doing that again.
Right. Good motivation. You mentioned a few times COVID, and I know that's had a huge impact. I'm sure everybody in the room today has, in different ways, felt the impact of COVID. The lockdowns, the different effects on campus life. How did you navigate that? Because all this was happening during a really strange time in our history. And what would be your lessons for other people from how you made your way through that difficult experience?
Yeah, COVID was really strange, especially because I did a subject that had a lot of lab in it. So we would have had, multiple hours of lab every single week for both first and second year, and both of those were affected by COVID. And for a lot of us in the academic sense, that was really hard because, on one hand, you're paying for it, you're paying this tuition fee and you expect to be in the lab and you can't go in. And lots of people that I know, like my peers on my courses, were genuinely concerned that they were going to be unemployable because they didn't have this experience that everybody else before us was going to have. I mean, if I go for a job against someone who graduated in 2019, they have 3 years of lab experience and I had 1. And we all felt like we were at this massive disadvantage and we didn't really know where to go with that. But that, in my experience, has made a really motivated group of people, weirdly enough. Like everyone I know either got a placement experience between the second and the third year or went and did something virtual in like a different career field that at least gave them some like really practical hands-on corporate experience, or they went and they did something sort of after university and they maybe did like 6 months before they decided what career they wanted to go into. And so in the like professional development sense, while it was at the time awful to navigate and it was like we're getting half a university experience, it made a group of people that realise you have to go out and grab it. But in the personal sense, like I think, I don't really know how any of us really dealt with that, but we sort of just became like online friends.
Right.
A lot of the people I know, like we would, if we had a task that normally you would have done in the library, you book a room, you work through whatever it is that's been set in a module, you end up doing this like Teams recording instead. So we would sit on Zoom and we would sort of do like a Zoom meet workshop instead of going sitting in a PC lab. So while there were workarounds, it wasn't the same, but we made do.
Yeah. And that, you mentioned that move into work from after that, the kind of opportunities, not feeling like you had the experience. We've talked previously, and Natalie and I have had many fascinating conversations before this, about this really tough subject of self-sabotage, almost where you see something that's a barrier, and rather than feeling positive about it, which you have an extraordinary ability to do, actually the opposite can happen. You can start to criticise yourself and almost to a point of getting in the way of yourself to try and get those opportunities. So if you're comfortable in sharing it, can you tell me a bit more about your experience of that and what your lessons learned were?
Yeah, so I'm a prolific self-sabotager, but at the very first point where it's available. So I have this like awful habit of I will go, oh, there's this thing, this opportunity, this grant, this like placement experience or this job. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm not qualified. I'm obviously not qualified for that. So I'm not even going to apply. I did this so I was, when I was in my second year, considering taking a year out and doing a year in industry. And I wasn't really sure that I wanted to do it. So there was already that doubt in my mind where I was like, oh, I would rather graduate when I said I was going to graduate than take another year. And so I sort of was 50-50 and I went through the motions of this application that I was doing, and I ended up in the final round of this like really big data analysis company's interviews, and they invited us for like an all paid expenses like week in London to do this exam, and I was like, oh no, I'm definitely not qualified for that. I'd never been to London ever.
Right.
So I was like, my first time in London cannot be me trying to find the headquarters of this company. It's not happening.
Yeah.
So I emailed them and told them that I was on holiday in Spain.
Oh.
And I was like, yeah, I'm not in the country. And then they were like, oh, well, we'll move it. We'll move it and we'll make it so that you're available. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to make up something else now. So in the end, I ignored their email for like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And in the end, I said to them, oh, I've chosen something else elsewhere.
Right.
Blatant lie, hadn't, but was terrified of going because I was like, there's no way that I'm even in the same ballpark as whoever's going to be there. Because to me, like a data analysis job in a corporate environment in London, who am I to do that with a B in GCSE maths? It's not happening. So I was not going to go to that. And then I sort of was like, okay, well, it's a good job that I didn't go, because I would have done it because it was a year. I didn't want to do a year anyway. And I sort of convinced myself it was fine through that angle. And then I was like, but I do want to do a summer.
Yeah.
So I'll apply for things in the summer. And then I applied to something with Cancer Research UK in Cambridge. Went through all the interviews, did a panel interview, did one of those terrible ones where they ask you like theoretical questions and you think to yourself, I don't even know where to start with this answer. Got offered it and told them that I'd picked something else, and it wasn't true. And I sort of went through the motions of doing that, and I think I did it 4 times.
Wow.
And I was like, I need to stop.
Yeah.
Like, at some point, I'm just going to have to accept that I'm getting these offers because I am capable of doing them.
Yeah.
They wouldn't offer them to you if you weren't able to do it. And it really I had to sit down and be like, I either want this or I don't. Because it's all right for it to be really new and be really scary and for you to feel like totally out of your depth, but they know that. These companies that were inviting me to these things or offering me places on things knew exactly what I had done. They'd seen my CV, they'd seen my cover letters, they'd interviewed me 3, 4, 5 times, some of them. They weren't under any illusions, and I had never lied to them. So I think this idea that like my self-sabotaging habit of being, actually can't do that, sorry, was just coming from imposter syndrome, really. It was coming from this idea that I was obviously not capable of it, so they had made a mistake and I was going to fix it.
Yeah.
Which is a really odd mindset to have, but it's quite common, really.
Yeah. Where do you think that comes from? I think there's a lot of imposter syndrome about, and certainly when I'm recruiting, I probably recruited, I was thinking the other day, 200-300 people over the course of my career. And you're absolutely right. If you're in front of me on Teams or in that room, it's because I really, really want you to do the job. I already think you can do it. I just need to make a bit of a specific choice about who's got the right balance for what I actually need on an average Wednesday. But where's this imposter syndrome coming from? You're not even getting into the room at this point.
I think for me personally, it comes from this idea that I have no connections in terms of like career-based roles. So I didn't know anyone at any of the places that I was interviewing, but I had friends that were doing other courses that had like reached out to recruiters, and like they'd had a conversation with a recruiter. So you sit down with this friend who's applying to like a similar scheme, and they know the ins and outs of it and where it's going. And I'm like, I don't even know how you contact a recruiter. Or you see people on LinkedIn and they've got like 500 connections and have done like 3 months in America and like in a lab that won a Nobel Prize, and you think, I literally am so far behind the curve of where everyone else is that I don't even want to put myself out there. But in reality, like most people are in the same position that I was in, where we're all just kind of looking for something to get us on the ladder, something to start. And for me, the imposter syndrome is because I'm seeing the end result for most people. Like I'm looking at people who are 6, 7, 8 years further down their career line, and I'm looking at them and thinking, wouldn't even know where to start.
Right.
And then because I don't know where to start, I'm refusing to start. Whereas now, in hindsight, having done a summer placement, having been in that and like spoke to people and got to know people that are in these positions, you realise that the best thing you can do is just get involved. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You're not compelled to then stay there forever. But the experiences that you gain, even in failure, especially in like the non-academic environment, in sort of like a professional role, will guide you in their own right. If you do something and you think to yourself, never again, literally never again, best that it's early on, then you'd be tied into a contract somewhere post-graduation thinking, I can't believe this happened.
Absolutely. One of the things we say in the book is nothing is wasted, even a bad experience, so you can learn from it. And one of the interesting things you were saying earlier about sources of advice as well was that actually it's really helpful to speak to people who are not 6, 7, 8 years down the line in the career, or even the director. It can be helpful to speak to somebody who's doing the job you might want to do eventually. But people who very recently had that experience. So where did you go for those sources of advice, and what would you advise this group to look for in terms of good sources of advice in that first shift into work?
Okay, so for me, I'm now doing an MRes at the university, and I did my placement in a lab that's on campus on biosciences, and I did this MRes in an area that I was really interested in. So that was sort of my foot in the door, kind of put yourself out there, get the experience. But while I was there were 2 people in that lab who were also doing an MRes and had got places on PhDs. So they were sort of 1 and 2 steps ahead of me. They were on the course that I knew I wanted to go into because I wanted to do the MRes, but they were also already had PhD applications done and successful. and they were 2, maybe 3 years older than me. So very easy to relate to them, very easy to have a normal conversation. And they're literally every day, 9 till 5. And you sort of fall into conversations naturally with people in those environments. So one of them was amazing, and she literally walked me through her entire application for a PhD, and I had never seen one. So I'd had no idea what was involved in that, but she was more than happy to show it to me. So she was really generous, and you will find people like that. At least for me, I have never like approached someone who I've like had a couple of conversations with about something that I want to do and asked them their opinion and had them go, I don't want to talk to you about it, ever. You sort of build it up in your mind. It's like, I don't want to either. I don't want to come across like I'm pushy. But if somebody came to me now as an undergrad and was like, I want to do what you're doing, I want to go into the lab that you're going into, I would show them what I'd done in a heartbeat. It's not a big deal. So for me, it's like, if you're getting the opportunity to like go and work for the university in an open day, and you go and work in part of the open day where there's a big group of people, there might be 5 or 6 of you from different courses, from different years, and it just so happens that one of them maybe has done, so one of my friends did her undergrad in biology and is now gone into marketing. But she found her link into marketing through someone that she met during a welcome event. Right. So she knew someone that was doing a marketing course that had seen a job posting for a science communication company. And that one conversation is now like her whole career path. So it's just getting involved in as many like events as you can to just have a conversation with someone that might have something that's useful for you.
Absolutely. And I think that's that combination of reflecting on yourself and your values and the things that you want to pursue rather than necessarily the subject or the top line career. Looking at your journey and thinking about those sorts of advice, but going to people who are a bit closer to you, and then spending the time trying stuff out always seems to come across. Of course, we have a fantastic career service here. I did an event recently with one of the careers coaches, Aidan, who was excellent and had an enormous amount of advice, and all that kind of working it through, working out what you really want to do, not what others want you to do or not what you think you should do, but what you really want to do, what brings you joy, as Natalie says, is a wonderful conversation to have there. And then, of course, we're doing an event with employers soon, so we'll have the opportunity to kind of just get a flavour of what those other careers are. And if there are things that you're interested in exploring, do get in touch with the career service to say, is there anybody in the alumni network who do these kind of things? I quite often give little bits of advice for people interested in social impact and charity, and I did a tech startup for a bit. I even did a theatre company that was rubbish and completely fell apart, but that's another story. But all those little tasters of what other people are doing, and I absolutely guarantee you anybody worth talking to has got half an hour for a coffee and a bit of a chat about how at least they got there. We're going to finish up now, so I want to give this group a chance to ask any questions. And so I'm going to end with the question I always ask at the end of the podcast, which is, what one piece of advice would you give your younger self?
I think, well, it links quite heavily to what we've just said. I think when I was younger, was not someone who really engaged with sort of extracurriculars in any way, shape or form. Especially if you've come sort of out of the British high schooling experience, or you've been to a school where it's like, you're there from 8:30 in the morning until 4 at night and you just want to go. You sort of bring that attitude with you. But as I've sort of come through undergrad, I've realised that the more you get involved, the more people you meet, the more you expand this network. And you hear the term networking all the time, I know, and it seems so alien, especially when you're like a fresher and you're like, what do you mean? Nobody on my course knows anything anyway, we're all brand new. But the more things that you get involved with, whether it be like doing OpsNet like I did when I was 17, and then that led to me being invited to RO, which then led to me applying to university because somebody mentioned UCAS, and had that not happened, would I have even gone to university? Maybe not. It can be that you just show up to an event one day and you realise that actually like that seems really interesting and I want to go down that path. So for me, if I was going to say to do one thing, it would be to go and try everything that you can at least once, because you don't have to do it forever. You just have to give it a go once.
Marvellous piece of advice. Thank you very much, Natalie, for your honest reflections and all that. Quick round of applause. Any questions for us? I mean, really anything that's kind of on your mind at the moment, or something you hear a lot about, or you're concerned about, that you want to have a talk about. Yes.
You mentioned about how you started a tech startup and a theatre company and how that kind of failed. But I wanted to ask how you navigate kind of risk and failure and moving into new things?
Absolutely. Great question. One of the things that I get a lot of inspiration from is what's called the spectrum of failure. I didn't invent it. It's a wonderful Harvard Business Review article about this. In fact, there's a whole edition about failure, which I dug out once. I've got a strange obsession with reading Harvard Business Review articles. It's not entirely normal. I've read hundreds of them, and there's so much good advice in there that you could have at the start of your career, and yet seems to be stuck in these journals and given to people who are well down the line with their career. And this spectrum of failure is written by Amy Edmondson, and it talks about a range from what we normally think about in terms of failure, which is, willfully getting something wrong. Maybe you're working in a shop and you ignore a customer, or you put the wrong amount into the till, or whatever, right through to actually where the cutting edge of tech is, which is experimentation, trying stuff out, doing a beta version, user testing. And I had a wonderful experience doing a podcast with one of the guys who worked on the COVID vaccine, a guy called Joe Grove. And his job in these really difficult times was to literally go into the lab every day and look at the secondary effects of the vaccine. So if you had a medical condition, or you lived in certain circumstances, or you had a certain heritage, what that might mean for the vaccine. And so day in, day out, during that really weird time, he went in and with the pipette in the dishes, tried out the versions of this vaccine on all of these different variables. And his greatest success was total failure. There was no reaction. There wasn't a problem. There was no secondary effect. And so his job actually was to fail. It was through that process of experimentation and trying, and you know this very well as a scientist, you want to fail. So if you start to think about a job as not, I'm going to get this wrong, but this could be really interesting and I might try something out and I could learn something from it. It's a really different way of thinking about it. The tech startup was fascinating because actually the vast majority of small businesses do fail. It's very hard to get them off the ground, and I think that gives people a big sense of risk. But what we did was think about it really differently. It was a social impact startup. We wanted it to make a big difference in everything from food surplus redistribution through to employee volunteering. And we knew it was a really hard market to go into. And that it hit the growth. It didn't become the massive success story, but it's still running and it's still doing amazingly good work. And what we learned along the way, we were able to package up and give out to others, and we changed how a lot of companies delivered their work. So I guess there's something about maybe thinking like a scientist, feeling a bit more experimental, and getting rid of that mindset that you've been given all the way through school, which is grades and pass marks and the next stage and success and failure, and it just doesn't apply in work at all. In fact, the most exciting career is one where you try lots of things out and go in loads of different directions, and as something new emerges, explore that too. So yes, that would be my thoughts on failure.
First of all, thank you for this podcast overview. Thank you. And naturally talk about self-sabotage and self-rejection. So this question for both of you, I really curious about your how you think. Do you have any strategy for this to not doing self-rejection? Any strategy, any tactic for to keep advice?
Me too? Yeah, so I think in hindsight and in terms of like the lessons that I've learned, now I can give it as advice, but for me it was more about learning it. When you come to these situations where you do feel like you're out of your depth, I think it's really important to consider, is this me experiencing like imposter syndrome and I'm not capable of this? And if that's the angle that it's coming from, then you really just need to sit down and reflect. Like, you've got this far, and if you're in the position where you've been offered something, you've been offered it because they think you're capable. And if the person who knows the role inside out thinks you're capable, they're very unlikely to be wrong. But I think there's also an element where you can come at it and the feeling can come from it being so new, because a lot of us will be scared of things that are new. You try something and you think, oh, I don't know if I'm suited to this, because on your induction day, they say something and you think, I didn't realise that was a part of it. So sometimes it is also just about giving things a bit of time, giving yourself time, giving yourself some leniency. Like it's okay if you try something and you don't immediately fall into being perfect at it. Because a lot of us will feel like if we're not immediately great at it, then we're terrible at it, and that's the end of it. But in these sort of early career roles, or placement experiences, or work experience, whatever it may be, the whole idea is that you grow and you develop. So when you have that feeling of, oh, I'm not sure what I'm doing here, I don't know if this is for me, there's lessons to be learned in that too. And you can go about asking the right questions to have those questions answered, if that makes sense.
I think there's two things I'd advise. One is not my example at all. It's from a brilliant guy called Imran, who does a similar job to me in public affairs. And he said he never used to do media interviews because he just felt that, why should anybody listen to me? I'm really terrible at this. All of these polished people are up on the TV and on the radio, and nobody would want to listen to me. And then he made a commitment to himself to do 1,000 bad interviews, which I love. He's like, I am just going to keep doing terrible interviews. And eventually, obviously far less than 1,000, he started getting really good at it because so much of it is just the practice and the exposure. So, I don't know, give yourself a goal to do it badly. That seems to be one bit of advice. The other one that I think's really interesting about this question of imposter syndrome is a bit of that self-reflection. You're going to have a think about, why do I really think that? And can I challenge it? One of the major ones I hear a lot is when you're starting out in your career, you sort of think to yourself, or at any job actually, or doing your postgraduate degree, like, they're going to find me out. There's loads I don't know, and I'm going to be discovered, and they're going to chuck me off the course or get rid of me in the job. But actually, if you convert that into a question and say, well, that's just a belief, but what do I actually know? What do I need to learn about? What am I going to need to explore to do this well? And one of the biggest pieces of advice I give to people starting a new job is to sit down as soon as possible with their boss or their line manager and ask this simple question: what do I need to learn to do this job really well? And then you've totally reframed it, right? You're not. They're not expecting you to know everything. They're not. You're not expecting to know everything, but you're asking that one question: what do I need to know to do this job really well? And you've started on a very different basis. And then I think the reaction will be not, I'm going to throw you in front of this presentation, or I'm going to expect you to produce this report to this standard, but they're going to start to teach you. They're going to start to bring you through that. And I think that's a much more enjoyable experience in work. Thank you. Any other questions for us?
I have follow-up question on imposter syndrome. So while a person is suffering from imposter syndrome, he usually requires external validation, right? And whenever he don't get that, then there is a kind of self-rejection going in his mind. So it's kind of sort of dependency of external validation, right? How to disease?
Yeah. So for me, as an undergrad or as a postgrad, you are right. Like, in essence, this idea of imposter syndrome comes from your internal belief that you are not capable of the external expectations, right? So a lot of the time, as you progress through something and you realise, oh, I'm 7 months into this 10-month course and they haven't thrown me off, you sort of are forced to realise. But in the sort of early stages where you're really like, oh, I've fluked my way into this and I don't know how I've got here, a lot of it can just be looking at the work that you put in, because it's really simple, but it is really true in the sense that for 90% of the things that you do, the work that you put in is reflected in your output. So if you know that you're committed to whatever it is that you're doing, in my instance, MRes, you're doing postgrad, you're committed, you're attending, you're participating, you're putting work in, that's all that you can expect of yourself. And as long as you are open to the idea that what I put in will be the outcome, it will be reflected, then you have to give yourself grace. You have to give yourself the ability to say, no, I am working really hard, and in the back of my mind I am worried that this is going to go wrong, but it won't, because I've made sure I've put in the work that's required to make sure that this is going to be successful.
I love that. Give yourself grace. And that's a wonderful point. And probably the best we can all do. Marvellous. We've got opportunity for one last question, if there are any. Marvellous. Well, Thank you very much, Natalie. Thank you to all of you for your wonderful questions. I hope that was helpful. An open offer is that if you ever want to contact me to that point of having somebody to talk to explore a career with, if anything I do is of interest, you can look me up on LinkedIn. It's Steve Haynes 101. There'll be copies of the book kicking about as well. There's an email address in that too. And always happy to help. And I think you'll find that the more you start to explore these things, the more you'll get some really helpful feedback. So I hope that is useful for you. Should we finish it up there, Ali? Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Handcuffs.